Nobody talks about Flight 247, and that's exactly what makes it so disturbing. A small regional aircraft carrying 19 people disappeared over the Peruvian Amazon on a rainy Wednesday morning in September 2003, and the world moved on the way the world does. A brief headline, a search that found nothing, a silence that filled in the space where 19 names used to be. 18 of those people died on impact. The 19th walked out of the jungle 8 years later, barefoot, 40 pounds lighter, with a beard down to his chest and a waterproof notebook filled margin to margin with 8 years of survival, written in handwriting that got smaller and smaller as the pages ran out. His name was Aaron Kolwaski. He was 29 years old when the plane went down. He was 37 when he walked back into the world. What happened to him in between is not something the human brain is built to process easily. 8 years, alone, in one of the most hostile environments on Earth, with nothing but what the jungle gave him, and a refusal so deep and so stubborn that the jungle eventually ran out of ways to break it. The flight was a short cargo hop with passenger seats, the kind of no-frills regional service that connected remote Amazonian towns to each other across distances that roads hadn't reached yet. Aaron was a wildlife photographer on assignment, the only foreigner on the manifest, wedged into a rear seat between camera equipment he'd spent 3 years saving to buy. The weather over the jungle that morning was the standard wet season overcast, nothing the pilots hadn't flown through 100 times. Then something went wrong in the left engine at altitude, a catastrophic failure that the accident investigators would later reconstruct from almost no evidence, and the aircraft entered a spiral descent over uncharted jungle canopy 60 miles from the nearest settlement. Aaron remembers the sound of the engine changing. He remembers the nose dropping. He remembers the trees coming up through the window faster than trees should move. Then he remembers nothing until he woke up 30 feet from the main wreckage with a fractured collarbone, a gash along his left temple, and the specific ringing silence of a jungle that has just absorbed something violent and returned immediately to its normal business. He found the other passengers. He wished he hadn't, but he needed to know, and he knew he needed to know, so he searched the wreckage with his good arm pressed against his chest and his mind in a place slightly removed from what his eyes were showing him. 18 people, all of them gone on impact or shortly after. He stood at the edge of the wreckage for a long time and said nothing, because there was nothing to say and no one to say it to, and the jungle filled the silence the way it fills everything, completely and without effort. Then he turned away and started thinking about water, because water was the first thing, and he knew that much, and knowing that much was all he had. The first year nearly killed him 4 separate times. The collarbone healed badly, knitting itself back together without anyone to set it properly, leaving him with a shoulder that clicked and ached and limited his range of motion in ways that made everything harder. He burned through his initial desperation in the first month, moving too fast, sleeping too little, burning calories he couldn't replace, and then hit a wall of exhaustion so complete he slept for almost 2 days straight against a ceiba trunk before his body let him continue. He contracted a parasite in month 4 that took 3 weeks to work through and left him 10 pounds lighter than he could afford to be. He made a fire on day 1 using a cigarette lighter salvaged from the wreckage and guarded that fire with a devotion that bordered on religious, because he understood immediately that the fire was not just warmth and cooked food, it was the proof that he was still a person in a place that had no category for persons. He built a clay vessel to carry coals in by month 2. He never let the fire die, not once, not in 8 years. What saved him was knowledge he didn't know he had. 3 years of wildlife photography in remote locations
had given him a working understanding of jungle environments that he'd never cataloged consciously, but that his body remembered when it needed to. He knew which direction rivers ran. He knew that following water downstream eventually led somewhere human. He knew the fruiting patterns of certain tree species. He knew how to build a basic shelter that shed rain. He knew how to move through dense vegetation without exhausting himself. None of this was survival training. It was just accumulated observation, the specific education of a man who had spent years paying attention to places most people never visited. It wasn't enough to make survival easy. Nothing was going to make survival easy. But it was enough to make survival possible, and possible was all he needed.
Year 2, he built the platform shelter, 8 feet off the ground on lashed timber poles above the flood line. Palm-thatched roof, walls on 3 sides, open on the 4th to face the river he'd settled beside. He built it over 6 weeks, working one-armed and then 1.5-armed as the collarbone continued its imperfect healing. He built it better than anything he'd ever built because it was the most important thing he'd ever built, and he knew it. He started a garden in year 3, transplanting edible plants he'd identified in the surrounding jungle into a cleared patch of riverside soil that he tended with the careful attention of a man who understands that the difference between having a garden and not having one is the difference between certainty and hope. He learned to fish with a system of woven traps that he improved across 18 months of trial and error until they worked reliably enough that food stopped being an emergency and became a routine. He talked to his family every evening, his parents in Chicago, his younger sister who just started college when he left, his best friend from university who he'd argued with about something stupid the last time they spoke and never resolved. He talked to them the way you talk to people who can hear you, reporting his day, describing what he'd eaten, making plans for when he got back. When, not if, always when. The when was the thing he protected most carefully, more carefully than the fire, more carefully than the food supply, because the when was the thing that kept him a person rather than just an organism surviving in a jungle. He said his own name aloud every morning when he woke up, Aaron Kolwaski. Just that, a declaration against disappearing. The close calls accumulated across the years like a separate ledger, a botfly infestation in year 2 that required improvised surgery he did not enjoy performing on himself, a flash flood in year 4 that took his shelter and everything in it and required him to rebuild from nothing at the age of 33 with a shoulder that still wasn't right, a jaguar that visited his camp 3 nights running in year 5, drawn by the smell of drying fish, that he drove off with fire and noise in the specific terrified aggression of a man who has survived too long to let a cat end it. A fever in year 6 that lasted 5 weeks and burned through his reserves so completely that when it broke, he weighed what he'd weighed at 16 years old. He recovered from all of it, not because he was exceptional, because he refused to be done. The rescue came from above, a Brazilian conservation survey helicopter flying a grid pattern over uncharted Amazonian territory in January 2011, spotted an anomaly in the jungle canopy, a cleared area, a structure, smoke. The pilot circled twice before he believed what he was seeing. They landed in the clearing Aaron had maintained beside the river and found him standing outside his shelter, 8 years of beard and 8 years of jungle and 8 years of every morning saying his own name, watching them come down from the sky with an expression the rescue pilot described afterward as the most complicated thing he'd ever seen on a human face. Not just relief, not just disbelief, something older and quieter than either, the expression of a man who'd made a promise to himself 3,000 mornings in a row and had just watched the universe confirm that the promise was worth keeping. He walked to the helicopter under his own power. He sat in the seat and put on the harness with hands that remembered how. Below him, the jungle contracted as they climbed, the clearing shrinking, the river becoming a thread,
the canopy closing over everything like it always does, like it had been doing for 8 years while he lived inside it and refused to disappear. He looked down at it until he couldn't see it anymore. Then he looked forward. He was 37 years old. He had been gone a long time. He was going home.